Hello and welcome to the Gifted in Real Life podcast. Today we have a special guest. Sister Keishonda is here to share with us all the things that she does, all the many hats that she wears. And we're going to hear from her in her own words today. And it's going to be a special treat. Sister Cassandra, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. So if you wouldn't mind, would you just give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself and what it is that you do for a living as a 9-to-5er, if you will, as well as an entrepreneur?
Sure. So as JC said, my name is Sister Keishonda. I've been married for 17 years. I have 2 teenage children. So as a 9-to-5, I work in the clinical research industry. So if you're not familiar with what that is, when you're watching TV and you see those commercials come off across the screen about the different medications that you can take, I am one of the people that kind of act as a middleman to make sure that those medications are tested safely on human subjects before they go to the market. So that's what I do. And as an entrepreneur, I founded, own, operate, and run a private school, an entrepreneurial private school based in Illinois, but our school is national. So we have students all over the country. And so we teach entrepreneur principles. We teach our students how to publish their own books. We teach them about marketing and click funnels and email campaigns and investing in real estate. And so if you can think of it as an entrepreneur, we strive to teach our students those principles and give them those tools and resources.
Wow, that's a mouthful, and that is so awesome. Like a woman after my own heart. That is so important. And I'm so happy and I'm so proud that you guys have a school that does this. As an educator myself, I've seen the insides of public schools and I understand what goes on in them. And there's such a need for what you guys are doing. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you about the clinical research side. How did you get into that industry?
Uh, I've been doing it for 13, 14 years. So I just went to school, started with working as a coordinator, worked my way up to being what's called a clinical research associate, and just hit the ground running from there. Just stayed in the field.
So did you always want a career in medicine or the health field?
No,
No. So how did you come into it?
I wanted to save the world, if you will. Um, and so I have a background in psychology, right? Then I have a minor in biology. And so my passion was basketball, and wanted to. I saw a lot growing up, and just wanted to do something better for my community. You see a lot of foster children and you see a lot of broken homes, things like that. And so, no, I didn't want to get into medicine. Growing up, I wanted to save the world. And so, when I was in college, looking for jobs, looking for work, came across the opportunity to work in medicine, I guess is what you can call it, as what's called a clinical research coordinator. And so got into that at Northwestern. And from there, started to pick the brains and the minds of the CRAs that would come to me at that time. And so, hey, I want to get into what you do. You seem to enjoy what you're doing. You're traveling a lot, but you're also being impactful in what you're doing with the community and what you're doing with the broader community, if you will, not just, right here at home. Started applying for jobs and, got my foot in the door and been doing it ever since.
Wow. So you took an opportunity that came with you and you grew it. You were able to recognize the people around you getting value in what they did. And so that kind of rubbed off on you, huh?
Yes, ma'am.
So what has the journey been like? Did you find it difficult to move up the ranks?
No, it's one of those things where if you stick with something, it's kind of like in entrepreneurship. It works the same way with any industry. Whatever you do in life, if you're consistent, then you find success. And so I've just continued to be consistent in what I do. Just work hard, do a good job, be consistent, and you find success in everything that you do. And so that's been my experience. That's been my journey. It's just being consistent, doing what you do, doing it well, doing a good job, and just remaining consistent.
Okay. I agree with that. And I think that sometimes when we're younger, when we're kids and we think about what we want to be when we grow up, we don't always have a clear vision of that. But I think that sometimes we sort of subconsciously have an idea. And I think that sometimes we move on a certain frequency when we are around it or we find out a little bit of information about it. I think we sort of attract what it is that we want to do. And you said that you didn't like visualize or you didn't plan to go into this field, but can you think of anything that you studied or in your background that's related to this that was sort of indirectly related?
Definitely minored in biology. So the study of the sciences, and the actual job, right? There's no degree, if you will, to do what I do. And it definitely that.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, as time goes on, you can get a master's degree and things like that in clinical research. But nobody walks in and say, "Hey, I want to get a bachelor's degree in being a CRA." But the so no, there's no degree, if you will, but the skills and the skill set that I've learned that again are applicable to just life skills is what's important, I think. So being a good communicator, right? Being able to not only articulate what I'm thinking, but also write it down. Um, Skills that I've picked up as an entrepreneur and along the way as being in clinical research. One of my favorite books that I've read is How to Win Friends and Influence People. And so that book doesn't talk about, well, how do you win friends and influence people as a CRA? Well, how do you win friends and influence people as an entrepreneur? It just talks about the skill set of developing good relationships with people in general. And so you can take that skill set and apply it to this field in particular, because a big part of what I do is communicating with other people. While my job is to make sure that before those drugs go on the market, that they're tested on human subjects. But the biggest biggest responsibility that I have is keeping those human subjects safe. And while I don't interact with those human subjects directly, I interact with the physicians and the nurses that do interact with them. And so I have to have good communication skills when it comes to communicating with them, because I have to make sure that they're doing their job to keep the patient safe, that they're doing their job to make sure that the data doesn't get uh, keeping the integrity of the data, keeping the integrity of the research that's being done. And so there's no particular degree, if you will, but there's skills that you develop over time that go into application. Because there's many different ways to do what I do. So it depends on what company you work for. That
Mhm.
company will show you how to do the job at their company. But then there's a whole set of skills that you have to bring to the table that has nothing to do with this particular one company. And again, like I said, communication skills, your writing skills, being on time, being responsible. Those kinds of things are half the job, if not more than half the job. And that's not something that's taught in a classroom. That's something that's learned along the way in life. That's something that you develop as you grow into adulthood.
Right. So I want to shift gears for a minute and I'd like to ask you, so how are you able to manage what all the things that you do in your full-time position and as an entrepreneur? Because not only do you do these two full-time things, or I'm saying full-time, I don't know what, to what degree, but you're also a wife and a mother. How do you make time for all of this, and how do you keep yourself sort of charged and balanced?
Um, Something that people have told me over the past few years is that um, I have a knack for being organized, and I've started to kind of take ownership of that. And so, one of the things that's really important to me is just simply being organized in my life. And I use to-do lists, I use checklists, I use notes in my cell phone, I use folders in my email. When you talk about being organized just as an employee, right, in clinical research. And then as a wife and as a mom, I think that going back to just being consistent, staying on top of communicating with my children, right? So they go to the school where I teach. And obviously, I, I live with my husband, but he also is a co-founder of the school. So he's at the school as well. One of the things that my husband and I make time for, mainly in the last like year and a half, is that we started doing ongoing marriage counseling. And we consistently, no matter what, we find the time to make that 1 hour a week. And at this point, it's not, it's like if you go to the gym, right? You work out. I mean, once you're in shape, you're in shape, but you keep going so that you can stay in shape. And so
Right. Maintenance.
we maintain, right? At this point, we're maintaining our marriage. We're maintaining healthy, happy relationship. So just making time for finding the priorities in my life and making sure that I make time for those priorities. And at the same time, being comfortable with not being able to get everything done in one day, being comfortable at a certain point, you know, it's 9, 10 o'clock at night. I got to let it go. But then
Yeah.
maybe it's 9, 10 o'clock at night and I get things done. I mean, it's balanced. It goes both ways. Sometimes I could be up working for the school, doing something, answering emails, taking care of some paperwork, putting together some sort of email campaign, or I could be writing a report or traveling for work and it's, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. And then there's other days where, like today, it's a Saturday, I don't have much on my plate outside of this. Then, the rest of my day is checking in with my children, making sure I cook dinner tonight. So it's just finding balance.
Right. So tell me about your school and how what prompted you to start the school?
Uh, so my daughter was going to a private school here in our city, and I don't know. I'm selfish in that I didn't think that anybody could educate my baby as well as I could, and so Dad and I wanted to pull her out of that private school, and so we homeschooled her from 0 to 6. So she she only went to the private school for first, second, and third grade. So we homeschooled her from 0 to 6. And in that time, I knew that I could homeschool a 0 to 6 year old because at that point, I just need to teach her the alphabet. I need to teach her to count, teach her to add, subtract. But as she got older, I knew that I don't know exactly what should a third grader be doing in English. I don't really know. I know that she needs English. I know she should know what a verb is and a noun, but I don't know exactly what is the scope and sequence of third grade English. What's the scope of third grade science? And so when we talked about pulling her out of the private school, of course, when you put something in the universe, what you ask for comes back to you. And so
Yes, it does.
finding a curriculum that it allowed me to homeschool her, but I didn't have to come up with what she needed to learn. I didn't have to be like, okay, I know she's going into fourth grade. What should she be doing in math right now? The curriculum did that for me. And when I realized that this curriculum did it for me, I brought it back to my husband like, hey, I'm thinking about if this curriculum is good enough for our daughter, then it's good enough for our community because the local public school, as you've talked about, it's just not good. It's horrendous in the area where I'm at. And so wanting to give back to my community, going back to my roots, wanting to save the world, I'm like, if this curriculum is good enough for my daughter, then it's good enough for the entire community. So why don't we start a school and get all the children to benefit from this curriculum? When we did that, we decided to open the school. And at that time, we had people around us who we're giving advice. And one of the things that someone said to us is that you're a private school, that's a business. What are you going to do to set yourself apart as a school, right? What's different about this school than the one up the street? And at the time, my husband and I also owned and operated a beauty supply store. So we had already been entrepreneurs for a while. And so when the sister shared that with us, we're like, well, what can we do? What do we have that's different from everybody else? What do we have that we can bring to the table? Because I don't want to set myself apart, but then I don't know what I'm doing. And brainstorming, pillow talking, whatever you want to call it, we're like, you know what? What if we taught our students the same entrepreneur skills and things that we're developing as we're growing as entrepreneurs? Why do children have to wait until they're 35 to start to develop the skills that we're
Exactly.
again, there is no college degree for entrepreneurship. So let's give these skills to 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds. And then at the same time, we just decided, you know what, let's have them write a book too. Let's have them publish their own book. At the time, my husband was working on writing his first book. And I'm like, well, if you can write a book, and of course, me being in the background, I'm helping him with it. He's writing the book, but I did everything else when it came to publishing it. So I'm like, well, if you can write a book, then we can have children write a book and we'll do all the work to publish it for them. And so we were like, okay, let's start a school and our focus is going to be entrepreneurship. Oh, and by the way, all of our students are going to write books. And then we're like, well, you know what? Around here and across America, right? Children don't get Black history, especially Black children. They get, and I'm not knocking Rosa, I'm not knocking Dr. King, I'm not knocking Malcolm.
Say it.
All they ever get. That's all they
Say
ever.
it.
And we wanted our students, again, saving the world. Now that we have them in this classroom setting, let's make Black history an elective for all of our students. And so they go much further back in history than what we talk to our students about. Black people did great things before slavery. So when our focus is not even all the great things we did after slavery, right? Who were we before slavery? And so we focus on history of Black people long before slavery, right? We were kings and queens and princes and princesses, and we built pyramids, and there was the Imhoteps of the world that were long before slavery. So we want our children to know their greatness and to know their history, not the first African American to do something after we were slaves. Like, it's great that we're the first to do something, but are you sure we were the first to do it, or did somebody else do that 1,000 years ago and we just don't know about it because all we hear about is everything that happened after slavery? So we put all of that together. Voila.
That is, wow, that is phenomenal because it's so true. It's so true. And not only that, like, I think a lot of times in school traditionally, we've relegated our history to the United States, but we exist all over the world, then and now. And like you said, definitely before slavery existed, there's so much of our history that people don't understand, even just about where we stand in the US. Like, there's some deep things here that people just don't even know about. And I'm not gonna go into that because this is not my interview, but
Yes.
but I what you said resonates so much, and we know each other, so we talk about this. But um I homeschooled my kids too for a little while, and I don't anymore for two reasons: because I'm an entrepreneur and it does take a certain amount of time and energy, and I just don't have the support system, if you will, around me. And all I mean by that is just that my husband and I don't live around family. And so, not that we need to homeschool, but it's just a lot. And so I am the type of person who wants to give them my undivided attention, and I can't do that if I'm trying to run a business at the exact same time. So I do a modified version of that right now with one of my children. I do homeschool for part of the day, but just the fact that they can be in a nurturing environment
Mm-hmm.
is so huge for their mental health and for their psyche. I mean, I've been in classrooms and I've seen some things, I've experienced some things, and just cannot tell you enough how proud I am that you guys have this school. And I can't wait to see you have franchise models duplicated around the US because people need access to this. If there's a parent or if there are parents who have the wherewithal and they want this for their child, then I think they should be able to get it. Now, I'm going to
Absolutely.
ask a question that's sort of controversial, but I really want to go there about this school because it's so important, more than I think parents understand. One of the reasons you did this is because your child is academically gifted. She excels academically. And the first thing that a public school is going to try to do is make her fit in to her same age peers, same age academically. And so when that happens, you get a shrinking child in a
Mm,
lot of different ways. And for you to position her to be able to have no ceiling,
mm,
I mean, that just gives her like the trajectory of her life has been changed. Like she can do whatever. She's just going to have a certain sense of self-confidence and a sense of peace as she moves through the world because she doesn't know her limitations as
no,
well as some of her peers who attend a public school. And so was it at all difficult for you to come to this decision? And how quickly did you take action?
to come to the decision to start the school or to that I wanted to take my
To,
daughter out of in
that you
private.
wanted, but just that you wanted to take control of her education. You wanted to be intentional about that.
So that decision came before she was even conceived, to be honest with
Mm.
you. So her father and I, we talked about and I'm gonna get off track and come back for just a second. I think that it's important for adults to have these kinds of conversations before you get married. And
Mhm.
so that's something that her father and I discussed before we were even married, right? Like if we're going to bring children into this world, and it was important to me looking for a mate, what do you want for your children? And if it didn't at least semi align up with what I wanted for my children, this probably isn't going to work. Luckily, it lined up, right?
All
So,
right now. I love that.
right, we wanted the absolute best education for our daughter. And from day one, before she was conceived, we had already intended to homeschool her entire life. That was already the plan. And so when it came to continuing with what we set in motion from the very beginning, it just made sense. We put her in public school. I'm sorry, in private school, over my dead body, public school. We put her in private school because, like you said, the work life balance it wasn't working, um, and dad uh, dad working, I'm working, I'm traveling. We and we couldn't give her the best. We couldn't give her the education that she deserved. So we're like, okay, let's find the best private school in our area, but then make sure we stay heavily involved with what she's doing. So when she went there, she was ready for first grade. So she had just turned 6. So she was one of those kindergartners started in the fall, right? Had turned 6. They we asked them to put her in a first grade classroom, but they didn't. So even in a private setting, they put her in the kindergarten classroom, which was fine. But at that point, she was almost carrying and borrowing in math. So and her reading level was just as high as her math, but they put her in a kindergarten classroom. She wasn't bored. I mean, she adjusted and we adjusted. We did things with her. We did, we continued the education at home. But the decision to continue to again put to continue to do what we set in motion with her education, it was a no-brainer. Like, you know what? This isn't working out. And there was honestly there was some racial tensions kind of issues in her private school, that kind of helped pushed us to pull her out of school. She ended up writing a paper about George Washington. So her class was studying George Washington, and being a young Black woman that she is, she understood that when George Washington was president, when he was around, her people were slaves. And so her class was talking about how great George Washington was. And She came home like, if George Washington was great, then if he was great, what does that say about me and my people, right? She's critically thinking this through, like he was great, but he had slaves. So anyway, she came home, she talked to Dad and I about it. Unbeknownst to us, she decides to write a paper about Washington. And her paper was about how he was not a great man, right? Because he had slaves. So
I love this so much.
Talking about George Washington was not this, he was a liar. You told me in school that he wasn't a liar. How could he not be a liar? And he had slaves that looked like me. So she wrote this paper for her teacher, and it wasn't an intellectual paper. She misspelled words. It was all over the place. But nonetheless, she gave it to her teacher, and her teacher was like, her teacher called her dad and I, and like, why did you write this paper for your daughter? And her dad and I are like, well, we didn't write it. I didn't even know she wrote the thing. Like, she did this all by her. She wanted you to know that George wasn't great and he was a liar. And this is how she wanted to express it to you. So she did her little Google research. She wrote her paper and gave it to the teacher, and the teacher didn't agree. So we end up, pulling her out of school at that point, pulling her out of private school. It was inevitable. And like I said, we put it into the universe that we wanted to pull her out. And so we found this curriculum. And what I love about what you said, and what's really important to me and even my husband, is that we have raised, at this point, she's raising herself. She's on autopilot, but we have raised a beautiful, brilliant child. And I wanted to see that same quality and characteristics in other children. And that's what's really, really what's driving me as an entrepreneur and with Key Giver's Academy. And what I love about it today is that we have second graders, we have first graders, we have almost half the students, at least in elementary. Middle and high school, they kind of struggle a little bit. They stuck in their ways. But those first graders, those second, third grade students in our classes, most of those students are a grade above at this point, and they're getting there. And so we're starting to see what we developed in our own child in other children. And that's what's heartwarming for me. That's what's beautiful for me, is that, yes, I can raise this awesome child, right? But then if I take her out of this bubble, out of this clean fish tank with mom and dad, and I put her in the world, what am I putting her into? What legacy am I leaving for her? And if I can't do anything to help make the world a better place, literally for her, then what am I doing here? Yes, I can raise my child, but as a young man said a few years ago, his son was killed in a tragic shooting. And he said to me, or he said in his son's funeral, I raised my son right, but somebody else didn't raise their baby right. And that baby killed my baby. And that stuck with me, right? I can raise my daughter as right as I want to. But if I don't do something about the people around her, if I don't do something about the people that's coming up with her, if I don't do something about helping to make the world a better place for her, then somebody else's baby gonna jack my baby. You know what I'm saying? Somebody else's knucklehead son gonna be trying to, do my daughter wrong. So it's so much bigger than just our own daughter at this point. Like, I just
so much bigger.
Literally, I can't save the world, but if I can try to have the best education for as many children as I possibly can, that's the goal, is to have the best education for all children, not just my own child.
So, Sis Keishonda, I think this is probably the most emotional podcast episode I've filmed, because I just know all too well what you're talking about. And earlier I mentioned a controversial question or comment that I was going to say, and I didn't say it. And so it is this: do you think that there are enough parents who look like you and me, who see the value of having a school like this and are making the effort to seek out and enroll their kids in a school like this?
I don't think so. It's interesting because I'm in a group chat in my city of entrepreneurs. And one of the hosts, I guess, of the chat had posted, and she asked me to post my events or whatever I got going on. And so I just recently made these posts about accepting registration, right? Accepting students for all grades, K through 12. And I posted that and I realized I'm in a group chat with over 50 Black